Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Qujano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden held his first full cabinet meeting Thursday as the White House shifts into selling its $2 trillion jobs and infrastructure plan. As we reported last night, the plan includes billions in road upgrades and electric car infrastructure, plus money for clean drinking water, new schools, high-speed internet, and electrical systems. The main funding mechanism would be an increase of the corporate tax from 21 to 28%. That's still below the 35% rate that was cut down under President Trump. To sell the plan, President Biden is tapping members of his cabinet to work with lawmakers.
I'm asking 5 cabinet members to take special responsibility to explain the plan to the American public. Working with my team here in the White House, these cabinet members will represent me in dealing with Congress, engage the public in selling the plan, and help work out the details as we refine it and move forward.
The meeting comes as we're learning the White House knew last week about the contamination of about 15 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We'll have more coming up on the supply chain issues that led to the mishap. Here's how White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki described why the discovery is just now being made public.
This plant has not been FDA approved. It's still going through a rigorous review. And J&J is, of course, working through that process to bring the facility online and gain authorization. So HHS updated us. In fact, this is probably the process working as it should. HHS updated us on J&J's manufacturing, including where things stood with the facility at the point where they learned about the issue. It wasn't going to impact our supply. It wasn't going to impact the supply to the American people.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Meridith McGraw, and Paul Blest join me now. Caitlin is CBSN's Washington reporter. Meridith is a White House reporter for Politico. And Paul is a contributor for Vice News and writer for the blog Discourse, which covers the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Welcome to you all. Meridith, let me start with you. The White House seems to be expressing some flexibility in this plan to make sure it gets passed. Do we know what they're willing to give in on?
Well, President Biden is really pushing for a big, ambitious plan here. As he alluded to in a speech yesterday in Pittsburgh, this is really his FDR, LBJ moment where he really wants to make big, sweeping, once-in-a-generation type changes to the economy and to really the social fabric of our country. I think in the back of their heads at the White House right now, they're taking the temperature with people on Wall Street and, of course, Republicans in Congress. But already McConnell has said that he sees this as a Trojan horse. He's going to be pushing back every step of the way. And the White House is going to have to figure out a way to get some Republicans on board here. And they're probably thinking about the political calculus of all of this as well. Infrastructure is traditionally a bipartisan issue, but at the same time, Republicans think that there's not enough infrastructure in here and there's too much of everything else. But on the other hand, the White House is getting pushback from Democrats who say that this just isn't going far enough for them. So it's going to be a really tough line for them to walk, and it's going to take a lot of tricky political diplomacy. And of course, all eyes are still going to be on people like Senator Joe Manchin from my home state of West Virginia and Kristen Sinema, moderates, Democratic moderates, who could be really key votes here. And while they might support plans to build highways and roads, things that are really popular with Americans, they might not be able to stomach the bill here. The cost.
All right. Well, Caitlin. Yeah. Well, Caitlin, Meredith touched on this a moment ago, but how does this plan fit into the Biden administration's larger goal of establishing a return of big government, and how does that impact how they sell it to the country?
Right. Well, it looks like they're going to be taking a lot of lessons from the COVID package, and they seem to have a similar mentality, which is go big or go home at this point, arguing that because of the need, there needs to be this big package. What was really interesting, you played a clip of Biden at his cabinet meeting earlier today, and he said he's going to enlist some of his cabinet members to go out there and sell the plan. Remember, when he was talking about COVID and selling that relief bill, he referenced when he was vice president and opportunities missed, he said, to really sell the public on health care and the financial rescue package. And so I think you'll hear him try to do a lot of that here. And I also think it will be interesting to look at the polling once we get further into this, once we actually have a piece of legislation, which of course is still to come. There's not an actual bill yet, but whether there are elements that do become popular among Republican voters. When Biden was asked during his press conference about the idea of bipartisanship and the idea that he hasn't gotten any yet, he said that Republican voters like his plan. So if that sticks with this, that could be something as part of the selling point to try to pick off Republicans. But COVID and infrastructure are very different. COVID was an immediate response to a crisis, while infrastructure, there are elements that are broadly popular. The devil is in the details, and you already see Republicans working to message against those very details.
Well, Paul, I want to turn now to voting rights and play a clip from President Biden's interview last night with ESPN. He was asked if he supports Major League Baseball players forcing the All-Star game to be moved out of Atlanta because of Georgia's new voting law. Here's his response. Let's listen to that.
I would strongly support them doing that. People look to them. They're leaders. Look at what's happened with the NBA as well. Look at what's happened across the board. The very people who are victimized the most are the people who are the leaders in these various sports. And it's just not right. This is Jim Crow on steroids, what they're doing in Georgia and 40 other states. What it's all about. Imagine passing a law saying you cannot provide water or food for someone standing in a line to vote?
So explain the background for us here and how the White House is trying to leverage its political power for an issue decided by the states.
Sure. Well, so Georgia passed this new voting restrictions bill last week, and it was signed by Governor Brian Kemp. It was sort of seen as a response to the Democrats winning Georgia for the first time in a generation, winning the 2 Senate seats in January, and President Biden won the state in November. The Biden administration is sort of using its leverage in this way because, states like Georgia and Texas that are run by Republicans, the opposition from President Biden is just sort of adding, fuel to this, after former President Trump's complaints about, so-called lax voting laws the last time around. By calling for the MLB to move the All-Star game out of Atlanta, that's sort of the next step that he can take, and that the Democrats can take besides, passing the For the People Act that can sort of impact, the pockets of Georgia when it comes to the boycotts. If there is a boycott from the MLB and they move the All-Star game out of Atlanta.
Well, Caitlin, earlier Thursday, lawmakers in Texas advanced a bill to restrict voting. What's in this plan, and how does it compare with your new reporting on a different GOP-dominated state actually expanding voting access?
That's right. So Georgia has obviously been in the spotlight this week, but people should start to pay attention to what's happening in Texas. Texas is a state that already has some of the most restrictive voting bills in the country, and they are trying to make it even more restrictive. So that measure that you mentioned that passed passed the Senate basically would effectively prohibit the use of drop boxes. It would limit early voting hours, and this is a really key provision here. It would allow partisan poll watchers to record voters, which of course raises all sorts of intimidation concerns. A lot of these proposals are aimed at Harris County, which includes Houston, which is the most diverse, one of the most diverse cities in the country, a county that found good use of expanding early voting hours and allowing people that kind of flexibility. So keep an eye on Texas as the next state to watch, in addition to Arizona and Florida, other states pushing forward with some of these restrictive measures. But what was really interesting, we found reporting on Kentucky. This is a state that has expanded its majority in locally among Republicans. Republicans have a super majority in the state House and state Senate. Has a Republican Secretary of State, but a Democratic governor. And they all worked together to pass a bill that is now on the governor's desk that actually expands access to the vote. So you have all these other states proposing restrictions. Kentucky actually passed a bill to expand early voting. It also gives the opportunity for counties to use voting centers, so it allows you to vote at a voting center instead of your precinct. A lot of times people get confused about which precinct to go to and aren't able to really cast their ballot that way. It also allows for curing of ballots, so if you make a mistake, you're allowed to fix it. But it also includes some security provisions as well, including prohibiting third-party collection of ballots or ballot harvesting, and also moving to a paper ballot system that allows them to audit better. So everyone we talked to in the state, Republicans and Democrats, said that, look, this is all about bipartisanship, working together and having measures that include security, but also access. And the Republican Secretary of State who we talked to said, you don't have to sacrifice security in order to expand access. And he noted that Republicans found in the 2020 election in Kentucky that they actually did quite well with expanded access to the vote. So they hope that they can be a model for some of these other states.
All right. Meanwhile, Meridith, I want to ask about your new reporting on what you call Lord of the Flies factionalism plaguing Trumpland. What have you learned?
Well, it's really become sort of a tale as old as time, infighting among Trump's inner circle. The former president has said that he likes having competition among his aides. It brings in fresh and new ideas, but it also just adds to behind the scenes chaos. And that seems to be going on right now as different factions of Trump's advisors are competing for clients, for candidates who are seeking Trump's endorsement, for fundraising bids, for the chance to have a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. One of the things we reported was there was actually a cease and desist letter that was sent out by Jones Day. That's the firm that handled things for the Trump campaign, that told former Trump campaign aides and assistants that they cannot use campaign information, donor information. And that's because one of Trump's top donors got an unsolicited call from a candidate asking for his money. And that rubbed not only that donor the wrong way, but people in some of the higher circles of the Republican Party the wrong way as well. And the former president, as he's down there in Mar-a-Lago, in Palm Beach, he's really struggled to get his footing and figure out exactly how to craft his operation. Things are still pretty fresh. It's only been a few months, but he really hasn't come up with a clear plan for what his office will look like. And Politico also reported that he's going to be bringing in Susie Wiles, who is a long-term Republican operative. She worked for Rick Scott, DeSantis, and Trump's bringing her on to kind of smooth things over and maybe tidy things up a little bit too.
All right. Well, Paul, we only have about a minute left, but I want to ask about the latest on Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, the congressman that you wrote about this morning. The story is somehow getting even more strange. So tell us, Paul, what is going on?
Yeah. So, yesterday the DC Examiner reported that they had texts and documents that were given to them that show these text messages between or sent to Matt Gaetz' father, Don Gaetz, who is a prominent Florida Republican, and it shows this sort of, what Gates is calling extortion. It sort of hasn't been proven what's going on there, but there's this plot that's been reported on by the Examiner that says, the Gates family was approached by a pair of people who were seeking $25 million to help recover Robert Levinson, who is an FBI agent who's been believed to be in Iran since 2007. It's just sort of getting even more bizarre by the day. The DOJ hasn't even officially confirmed the investigation is happening, as far as I'm aware. We're all sort of hearing this from Matt Gaetz in the New York Times report from the other night. It's sort of bound to get more strange as time goes on.
All right, we will all stay tuned. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Meridith McGraw, and Paul Blest, thank you all very much.